Hello friends, welcome back to Locally Raised. If this is your first video with me, my name is Marta, and just for a little context, I started this channel back in June because I wanted to chronicle a journey that my family started. In June, we moved into my childhood home here in Pennsylvania. We came across the country from Texas, and I also began this journey when we moved into this house to change the way that I source my family's food. I'm aiming to grow and raise more of our food and to source more food from local farmers. Ideally, my goal is that we would land at a point where about 40% of my family's food comes from our own backyard, about 40% comes from local farmers, and then the remaining 20% would come from the grocery store or sources like Azure Standard. There are foods that my family loves that we just cannot grow ourselves, and they aren't grown locally. Things like coffee and chocolate and tea and rice. And these are things I want to keep in our diet. But I really want the bulk of our food to be from our yard and from local farmers. So, what I'd like to do today is take you on a tour of our property. Like I said, we're on an acre and a quarter, so it's a modest sized property, but I know that we can produce some food on this land. And I want to show you what we've done so far, tell you about some of our dreams and our plans for this property, and then also show you some of my favorite books that have been informing our practice as we start to learn how to garden at a greater capacity and raise meat. So for starters, let me show you the two books that made me want to change the way that I eat and change the way that I source my family's food. The first book is Nourishing Traditions by Fallon. This is commonly recommended on homesteading channels. Maybe you've seen it before. I read this book about 2 years ago, and it was just kind of a relief to me to read something that seemed really grounded uh, when it comes to nutritional advice. There are so many competing voices when it comes to telling us what is healthy to feed our bodies. And I was feeling frustrated with getting different messages from different sources. And when I read the beginning of Nourishing Traditions, the information just rang true to me. It seemed well grounded and like information I could trust. And so I decided to tune out other voices telling me what's healthy and what's not, and allow this to sort of be an authority for me. So this book, as you can see, is massive. There's a lot of recipes in here. But for me, the real value of this book is in the beginning. Before it gets to the recipes, there's a lot of information on nutrition and on people groups around the world and how they've tended to eat and how that's impacted their health and their lifespans. So that's the information that I have taken from this, and that's what made me want to start drinking raw milk and eating pastured meats and fermenting or soaking my grains, things like that. So that's been one of the key books that kind of kicked off this whole new lifestyle and journey that my family's on. Another book that influenced me a lot is The Grow System. This book to me pointed to the potential to grow and raise food on a somewhat small amount of land. I have never been someone who's dreamed of 20 acres. I like having a little bit of land around me, but also living near neighbors and living near amenities. That works well for me. So the Grow System shows the potential for not only gardening on a space like mine, I'm on an acre and a quarter, but even raising your own meat on a space like mine. And so that got me really excited that maybe this kind of homesteading lifestyle is something I could do and I could incorporate into all the other aspects of my lifestyle. All right, let me take you outside and I'm going to walk you around our property, tell you some of my dreams, and show you some more books that are informing how I'm going to bring those about. As I leave my front door, the first thing you see is the garden. That field behind the garden is not mine. That belongs to the farmer whose house is off in the distance. I don't know if you can see it here. So my garden directly borders his field. I've got my strawberries here. And my garlic is on its way over here. I did not expect it to be so far along at this point. And some empty beds. You can see my jugs from last week's winter sowing. I can't wait for those to germinate. And then off in the distance are flower beds. For me, one of the challenges of this garden space is the field behind me. I love the view of the field. In the summer, this will be tall corn. And one of the things I was looking forward to when we decided to buy my childhood home is having that cornfield view. But I am also trying to practice chemical-free gardening, and that is not a chemical-free field. I see the farmer come through with pesticides, and then he comes through with herbicides, and later he comes through with fungicides. So I am trying to figure out how I want to manage gardening next to a chemical-heavy field. What I think I want to do is prioritize using this space for root crops, so it's less important that they've been near chemicals. And then I want to expand garden space elsewhere. The problem is I'm trying to decide where, because the best light on the property is here. This entire property is on a hill. We're at the top of the hill here, and the sun rises over there. And this is just definitely the sunniest area. So I'll show you where I'm thinking of putting some additional garden space. I told you I'd be sharing books that are part of each bit of this homesteading journey. When it comes to gardening, honestly, books have not been the first thing that I've turned to. I often go to my parents when I have questions about the garden because they've been gardening for a long time. I've also found YouTube very helpful for gardening because it's helpful to see practices in action rather than just read about them. So the one book I will mention that's influenced me is this one. It's an oldie but a goodie, Square Foot Gardening. I do not practice square foot gardening right now. You can see that these beds are not divided off into square feet. About 5 years ago, when I wanted to try planting my first little plot of vegetables, this was really helpful to me because it's so specific. So if you've never planted a garden and you're somebody who just likes being told exactly what to do, that book could be really helpful. There are two practices that I've taken away from this book that I still use. One is the recommendation for soil for filling raised beds. So he recommends 1 part perlite to 1 part compost to 1 part peat. It creates a really good nutrient-dense but light mix that allows plants to grow their largest. So I continue to use that recipe for my beds. The other principle I've taken away from this book, and this is somewhat basic, but it was helpful to me as a beginning gardener, is that when space is limited, if a plant can grow vertically, make it grow vertically. I don't need to have my squash plants and my cucumbers taking up valuable space, growing horizontally along the ground. So when I expand this garden space, I'm eager to build some vertical trellising and start to get things off the ground and use my space really well in that way. As we move past the garden, we come to a segment of the yard that's separated from the rest of the property by the driveway. This is where I put my beehive. When I was a kid, my dad actually kept bees in the very same spot. So here we are at my top bar hive. I started reading about the top bar hive about 1.5 years ago as I was starting to think about possibly doing some small-scale homesteading. I know that keeping bees is not exactly an easy place to start when it comes to dipping a toe into that homesteading pool, but I was just so excited about it when I read this book by Chandler, The Barefoot Beekeeper. This isn't so much a step-by-step guide on beekeeping as it is just a description of why he loves top bar hives and recommends using them. But he sold me on it. And then after reading this book, when I actually got the bees, I realized I was going to need more detailed information. And so I bought another book of his, Managing the Top Bar Hive. This one's much more specific and a step-by-step guide for somebody who actually wants to keep bees in a top bar hive. So I'm excited about having them, but there's Still a whole big chunk of land here that I'm not using. Let me show you the view and tell you what my thoughts are for this piece of land. This land slopes downwards and the driveway borders it all the way around. So it's hard to decide how to use this chunk because it is sloped, but I definitely want this to be productive. So this portion of land I think is where we will keep our chickens. We want to have egg-laying chickens. My plan is that we'll keep about 8. I think that's enough to provide my family with eggs. And I just got this book, so I haven't gotten to read it yet, but it seems to be the book everyone recommends, The Small Scale Poultry Flock by Harvey Ussery. One of the things that drew me to this book is that I want to use the deep litter method for cleaning my coop. So if you're not familiar with deep litter, it's just an approach to composting chicken droppings by applying bedding on top of them and sort of creating a composting system inside the coop so that the coop doesn't smell as much, doesn't need to be cleaned out as often. And then once you do clean it out, you can use that manure as compost in the garden. So Harvey's the one credited with sort of laying out this system, and I'm eager to read this book and keep chickens here. I think this land could do more though than support 8 egg-laying chickens. I'm wondering if this might also be enough space to raise a few meat birds, but I'm not sure how raising meat birds that I move around in ground tractors would work with sloped land. We'll see. All right, let me take you to the next portion of this property. As I walk down the hill and across the driveway, we come to a somewhat unusual part of this property. This is a portion of the property that John and I have spent a lot of time talking about and brainstorming, trying to figure out exactly how we want to use it. This is a long, somewhat narrow strip. A little bit of it has been cleared, but most of it is actually uncleared land. So it's a lot of brush and small trees and things that just will need to be cleared out. We're hoping that this can become pasture land, possibly. We're considering pigs, sheep, or goats. Obviously, pigs fall into a very different category. They don't graze and they don't do well on hills. So we might keep pigs in a portion of this or go for goats or sheep because they seem to do better on sloped land. There's a steep bank overlooking most of this portion of the property, so it's not comfortable or easy to access right now. We're going to have to figure out what we'll do with that. All right, that little walk brings us to the backyard, the one flat portion of land that we have. So I've been trying to track the light, but of course it's different at this time of year than it will be in spring and summer. I'm hoping that the additional garden space can go around here, that I could have a bunch of raised beds here with trellises between each bed to take advantage of vertical growing space, and that will give me the amount of garden space that I'm hoping for. Just to give you context, here's that steep bank overlooking the area we just came from. It is very steep. I'm not exactly sure what to do with that drop off. So right over here, against the end of the shed, is where I'm hoping the rabbit cages will go. As I said, this shed is where I'm hoping to keep rabbit cages and raise meat rabbits. I mentioned the book The Grow System earlier, but I want to mention it again here because this is the book that got me excited about backyard meat rabbits. Marjory Wildcraft talks about how they are an ideal protein source for families that have limited space because they are small and they reproduce rapidly. So I'm hopeful that my family can regularly have some of its protein supplied by rabbits that we keep right here. And finally, as I come up this hill, we are back to where we started, in front of the house, overlooking the garden. Thanks for letting me share some of my dreams and plans with you today and some of my favorite books. I will put all those titles down in the description box below. So if you're interested in any of those books, you can easily find them. I really hope that this video is one that I look back on a year from now and say, wow, look how much we've done. So I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. Join me on this journey, and I will see you next week. Bye.